I'm Kelly O'Connell. I'm a head of industry here at Google, and I'm sitting here with Joe from Croud. Welcome to our Chelsea offices. Excited to chat with you today. Tell me more about what you do.
Yeah, so my role at Croud is to oversee our strategy and planning department, and at its core is to make clients uncomfortable. So you're going to hear a little bit as we talk here today about maybe it goes a little far in some places, but it's the point to push and extend what they think marketing and media is capable of, and then constantly hold all of us accountable to delivering that.
I like that. So putting clients in a different mindset of how are we going to think differently, what are we going to do differently?
Yeah, from day one it's going to be a challenge. And just to understand, you're going to have homework from me, we're going to go back and forth on things, and it's a different dynamic and relationship that, then we're able to kind of hold on from that moment forward.
That's great. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what is most top of mind for you. What are sort of the big focus areas that are taking up the majority of your headspace?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first one for us with the majority of our clients is shifting to better KPIs. And we spend a lot of time talking about moving from just activities to outcomes, right? And getting you further down into actually implementing towards business performance. And we're here to talk a little bit about lead gen today, right?
Yeah,
and kind of dive into the space. And I think in that lane of uncomfortable and challenging, one of the first conversations I have with clients sometimes is stop measuring the success of your marketing and your leads by the quality and quantity of those, right? How do we, it's a dead end, how do we take it further and establish it? And at its core, that might come off a little provocative, right, in terms of the nature of where that's going to go, but to take it back and make it in its simplest form, right? Take lead forms, for example, and in our work that we do with a lot of higher education clients, most of the time these days, prospects know very well that when they submit a lead form, they're gonna get spammed. They know that that's part of the process now, right? And so therefore, it leads you down a path of, okay, well, if you're already submitting that anyway, either you're so already in tune with that business or service that you're gonna get or in want or need of it, or you're gonna get spammed, but you do so anyway, which maybe means you're not that great of a prospect in the first place, right? And the numbers kind of bear it out a little bit in this space. So for higher education, we ran a study for a client. Their school, alongside 10 other universities, went around to students that were currently enrolled on campus. 85 to 90% of them, depending on the school, never filled out a lead form before attending. Right. So for that specific vertical in that space, it means it's a really hard job then to use leads as their only North Star, 100%. Right? We have to figure out a way to be able to take them further and establish explaining just more than just the effectiveness of one area, right? How do we take it down and make it, something that they can continuously turn back to? And judge success.
I mean, especially in the education space, these are really long cycles of conversions, and so you did make me a little uncomfortable when you said, lead quality is a dead end. What are we talking about here today? But no, I think what you're talking about is really pushing us towards, something deeper in the journey that we need to be able to measure to that's more accurate and more closely tied to the end goal, the final sign up, the final sale, et cetera. So I guess how do you push through that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think for most of our clients, if you take on that initial challenge, it feels like you're climbing Mount Everest with your hands tied. I get it. I understand that's a difficult thing to start with, right? That's our first conversation. But it's all about, phased recommendations and phased improvements, right? Number one just means starting with a better attribution system. Part of the reason that leads struggle for these clients is that they're still stuck on, last click attribution, right? So how do we move attribution to a way that makes your lead quality better, period, first. Second, then is just leaning into the available solutions, enable consent mode, enable enhanced conversions. Again, alone puts you in a way better place for what volume you're getting in and then being able to tie it backwards. And then if you really want to go the full route of how far we can go down, it's actually then developing those propensity models that are, more in tune and preference towards a better end optimization. And for higher education, it could be matriculations or just application submits, right? Takes you down further. You still use leads, but your end goal now is way more tied to what your business is actually trying to, survive off of.
100%. And when we think about the signals that we can get that far in the funnel, it really goes back to, at those earlier stages, getting the right data visibility. So I love that you were talking about sort of laying that foundation with either an enhanced conversions, because good data in means good data out. And if you are operating with, 5, 9, 10% less data without those things in mind, you don't know where your ultimate leads are going to be coming from, or, you're maybe missing out on some of the most important ones that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what else is top of mind for you?
I think the other one that I spend the most of my time these days talking about with clients is brand. And part of it goes back to that initial conversation as well, right? But it's a different take on brand. It's becoming back to like the forefront for most advertisers in focus, but in specifically using brand and holding it accountable for growth. Right, so brand to then end up driving performance, creating headroom that you can sweep up with performance in a different area to grow where the brand's going to go from this point forward. And for us, especially when you talk lead generation, it lands in like a very specific space, which is focus on 3 things. Consistency, meaning that we're leaning into frequency first over reach and impressions. And again, you can see a little bit of a backward shift towards like that better KPI, right? And like individuals lifted and cost per individual lifted, again, like trying to move that conversation, but leading into frequency and being able to actually like move people, understand what it's going to take for somebody to recall, especially in the fragmented world that we're in. Second being context. Where are we putting it? Why? Where is it showing up? How are they, coming in and interacting with you for the first time at that level about what you stand for? And then lastly is content, which comes down to creative, right? Or the message that you're putting out there. Yeah. And like the simplest form, again, the way we talk about it is say less more often with better creative.
I like it. Keep it simple. I also really love that you brought it back to the KPI. That's kind of been an undertone in our conversation so far, which is it's not just about lead quality. We also have to have a really quality KPI that we're oriented against.
Yes.
In my experience with lead gen advertisers, sometimes we're very performance oriented. It can be hard to think about changing those KPIs to something that have longer term horizons, like consideration and awareness.
Yep.
How do you make your clients uncomfortable in that conversation? How do you help them think differently?
Yeah, of course. It starts from day one, right? It's like that initial conversation we'll have is we're going to focus on the things that are way harder to measure, but are going to matter way more for your business, right? So if we're talking brand, it will be unaided brand awareness, not even aided, right? Because that, again, is easier for us to achieve. We're trying to make our jobs harder, right? You're going to hold us to something that's a lot harder for us to do, but will mean way more over time. What then it gets to is the balance of like, how do you turn brand and performance off, right? How do you know you've created headroom to move into that then your performance activity can work better, and tying those silos? Because that consistently comes back to being the problem, right? Is that people have better ways to measure brand now. There are better ways to measure performance, but when you're trying to do both consistently, it feels like if you don't have an MMM, you're starting from the ground up, right? And how do you just create the ladder for them to move up to consistently get to a little bit better of a sophistication of measurement, make them more comfortable with that uncomfortable bit, right?
Yep.
I always joke that we called it strategy and planning for a reason. Strategy is there to serve to make you uncomfortable, and planning is to show you that it's possible, right? Like that's the emphasis of the role, but we have to then deliver on it all the way down to advanced analytics.
What advice do you give lead gen advertisers that are starting to think about moving from a performance-centric approach in their marketing strategy to one that includes brand? Where should they start? Should they be, leveraging generative AI to create their creative? Should they be, establishing different KPIs? Where do they start?
Yeah, I think it's both of those to a certain extent, but the start needs to be take that simple step, right? And a lot of the times when you just look back at performance alone, it could be up to 60% of performance is driven by creative, right? So start with creative, because if I put together the best media plan, the best KPIs, I'm still only accounting for 40% of what you're able to achieve, right? So start with creative. Lean into Gen AI. If you don't think that you can tell a brand story immediately, or you don't have the expertise in-house, or it seems like this lofty thing, how can that help you? How can we get to 10 seconds that mean a lot to what we're trying to say, right? If I can get to 10 seconds of attention, that makes a huge difference in what we're trying to push forward. So how do you lean into these areas that, like, again, the solutions that exist to help make this a more comfortable leap as you kind of get into the space?
As we think about planning, we talked a little bit about the time horizons for KPIs, but how do you balance the short and long-term planning for these businesses, knowing that, maybe they're reliant on funding, maybe, there's other financial challenges within their organizations. How do you navigate those conversations?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think, we've seen that that CMO, CFO dynamic has become strained, right? And they're hurting. Like we talk to our CMOs now, it's difficult because you got into a world where marketing was always like that first cut, when it came to plans, when there needed to be budget savings or things that were going on. And now it's like everybody is so media dependent that you need to turn even more on or shift more into short term constantly to make back and get to break even, right? But you're doing so in taking away from your long term growth and in terms of brand, because that's always then the dynamic. It's like, well, we're not going to cut marketing, but we're going to cut brand as a part of marketing, right? Yeah. So it's giving them the understanding of like, well, this is what the opportunity cost of doing that is. Then like, what is the decay going to happen here? How many people might we lose that we've sustained or driven into from brand or have the potential to bring in versus that little bit of short-term growth. And sometimes you need that short-term, right? There just is the reality that a lot of our companies are just like, they have to make bottom line. Otherwise, that long-term growth doesn't matter either, right? So it's a really difficult song and dance, but it's one that, we consistently have. I think the challenge for them is it's really still tying these pipes together and being able to see what's under the hood, right? Like, I don't want to constantly go back to like pity the marketer, and I understand that part of our job is to figure this out. But they've been dealt a tough hand of trying to connect under the hood and reassess what's going on when your marketing data, all your other department data, whether it be enrollments in terms of higher ed or anything else, sits completely separate, let alone offline, right? So then being able to connect those things, we sit with clients that have really compelling data points. They're like, what did we accomplish? And it's like, you have all this data, but they can't connect it and say like, this undeniably drove this, right? And then it makes those decisions even harder. So it's constantly going back to like, what's the best qualified assumption that can be made off of this? What's the correlation that we feel good about, even if it's not causality, and getting them just a little bit further. Again, improved, just a little bit of phased improvement, one step at a time, and trying to get to a place where they can actually get to an understanding of how these two work consistently.
I think what you said about the shift of marketing really going from a cost center to now a profit center for businesses has been really a seismic shift in the last several years. And what I think that means is we really have to spend the time to get to that end goal of understanding all of the unit economics. And so it kind of goes back to what we said earlier of what are the foundations we're setting up? How are we going to measure those things? Because let's not pity the marketer. It's actually really exciting to sort of be more in the driver's seat, to be able to say we can drive this business, we can really accelerate growth. And the more we sort of feed the system to understand, are we measuring the right things? Are the outcomes truly aligned through all parties? I think it's then that we really just have an incredible amount of headroom to run together and to grow the business. Yeah,
and I think you look also at just the world we're in, right? And like the amount of touch points that exist now, right? We've gone through a huge change in fragmentation, right? I was reading a study about a week or two ago about that the average day now for an adult is 32 hours. And it's because of the amount of media touch points and different multitasking that people are doing. 13 of those hours are with media, right? So we have a huge opportunity to actually impact, right? And find better ways to touch them. But it's understanding that like this linear journey doesn't really exist anymore. It's a huge pile of stepping stones, and people are jumping back and forth from, we talk about search to a YouTube video, back to, a content article. Like, it's no longer just this easy to navigate path. And it's all about, the creativity that you can use in marketing, whether it is leaning into bits of, AI and generative AI as an obviously easy example, or just tying your media into content and culture in a different way. It's more important than ever, because we do have this huge opportunity in front of us, but it's like laying out that map and understanding exactly where you're going to jump back and forth. It's really difficult to see. So it's how can we use that to our advantage and pair it in the right way for impact? Yeah,
13 hours a day is pretty wild.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you feel like that rings true for you?
It does to a certain extent. As a dad, it's like I barely have any hours as it is outside of like, we're talking, I was up at 5 a.m. with my son this morning. But like, I think it's funny because a lot of times people love to just blame Gen Z on this. Like Gen Z broke the marketing funnel, which like, okay, sure. And maybe not in a bad way. Yeah. But it's honestly true of all of us, right? We're all spending so much time multitasking, trying to get all these different things done, and over the course of media, like I sit and will be watching YouTube videos, but then my next recommendation is, you know, Blippi, because that's what my son was watching versus what I was trying to get to. But it's how much time we're spending in one ecosystem, right? And it's difficult for us to navigate, but it's endless opportunity for us as marketers if you can understand the right ways to kind of read those tea leaves.
Yeah, we're Blippi subscribers too in our house.
You have to be. You have to be.
Well, what I think is interesting about that is sort of it's the urgency culture. You know, and
yes.
And you know, we're trying to do everything on our phones, we're trying to do everything for work, for our personal lives, and in between there, we're getting all of these like consolidated media messages and all these different touch points, to your point.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the data that we've seen that shows that if you get someone early on in the funnel and they're, you know, in your consideration set,
yep.
that will have a lasting effect. But to your point, it's going to be 32 stepping stones to get to the
yes.
final end goal. So you have to be very choiceful about where you're playing. And then I liked what you talked about earlier, which was really like, what is the right message at the right time? You talked about like context, consistency, etc. You have to be really use those tools to be very choiceful about where you play to get to that end goal.
Yeah, and that's the balance, right? Because for our marketers, it's hard. Like some of them don't have 18 months to wait for a consideration message to have that impact horizon of when it's going to actually impact for the business, right? So it's how do you lean into enough of it at time to give them things that then come backwards in business performance, and finding the balance between the two. It can't just be only let's raise consideration, even though it's a huge impact for different marketers. It's finding that balance, and then it's constantly what we come back to is just the balance of the different touch points, how they work together, the balance of the right KPIs, effectiveness and efficiency, and then getting people to that place where they feel more comfortable in what we're asking them to go and sell backwards to their board or their CFO, and believe that story that we're giving them.
And it's so important that all those people are speaking the same language, right?
Yes.
Like the board, the CFO, the marketing team, the agency, the Google partner, the other media partners, like everyone has to be able to independently articulate the KPIs and the priorities independently, or a lot of this doesn't actually work. So, really going back to just like establishing those quality KPIs and alignment up front to have like brutal honesty about what we will and what we won't do. So often I hear from lead gen advertisers, I want to run a YouTube campaign and, I want to drive awareness, but I'm going to be measuring conversions. And so it just doesn't add up. We have to really look ourselves in the mirror to understand like, what do we actually want to do? And I love that Croud is really focused on, okay, if that's the KPI you want, this is the right measurement strategy and this is the right time horizon to really truly set those expectations.
Yeah, and then holding your clients accountable to it, right? Which is not the part that's easy, but it's, sometimes you have to open that conversation with, well, this is actually what we agreed on trying to move here, and this is the time it's going to take. Like, you have to be patient and waiting for that. Sure, we'll give you some of these other reads, but we're not going to give you this whole data dump for everybody to go back on, because I know you're going to end up going back to what you've always done, and all of a sudden look at this a little differently, right? So, but it's being able to, from that first conversation, have the trust that this is going to be a little bit different. You're leaning into a different way of doing things, and to be challenged and be pushed and be okay with where that's going to net out. And in some cases, it's going to be not the easiest story for you to go back to tell, but the one that's going to make the biggest impact over time.
Yeah, I think mutual accountability is really one of those things that is a hallmark of a really strong partnership. So I love that you touched on that.
One question I had for you, because I'm not the only one talking to our clients, you guys are just as much in the shared partnership, right? What are the pain points you're hearing right now, especially in this lead gen space, that they're struggling with?
That's a great question. I think there's two different things that really come to mind for me. The first is really around just setting up the infrastructure. When we talk about putting together measurement solutions, we're talking about integration with partners, HubSpot, Zapier, et cetera, to try and build toward those offline conversions. We're also looking at, enhanced conversions as something that we want to be able to set up to make sure we have the right data visibility. Good data in means good data out. We have to be able to have the full visibility. And so that measurement foundation from the beginning takes time, takes resources, takes capacity, and, lead gen, really loves its instant gratification. We're performance advertisers. We want to see the numbers of our conversions. We want to see it today, right now. And so it's really hard sometimes to take a step back and work on that infrastructure when these organizations are really quite lean and trying to move quickly. The other thing I think a lot about is the change management associated with AI. And so as we think about AI's use in our platforms, how do we get comfortable with, strategies that are more goal-oriented, more open-minded. So as opposed to really like honing in on a very precise target, actually allowing the quality data to filter in so that we can find the right intent. But that doesn't always resonate with our clients. That, feels like we are losing control a little bit.
Sure.
But the reality is we're still in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And our roles as marketers are not changing, but how we do it will change. And so adapting to that AI mentality really requires a test and learn mindset. We have to sort of have that flexibility. We have to be in the boat with you, the agency partner, with our clients to make sure we're all on the same page. And test and learn doesn't have to be a free-for-all, right? It can be very thoughtful. It can be very strategic about what exactly do we want to measure? How do we specifically time it up against the right tentpole events so that we have that confidence and clarity going into a really prime time moment that we are going to deliver on the KPIs that we've aligned to. So I think those are two of the big things I really hear from clients a lot.
That makes sense. The one bit I took out of that as you were talking it through is about being a little bit more broad and kind of opening it up a little bit, right? And I think this is something we struggle with lead gen a lot because I already know who my target is. It's like this super specific, only this person. How do you help navigate those conversations of let's take it a little bit just outside that lane, but then allowing AI and everything else that we have to kind of close the gap for us?
Yeah, I mean, if you step back and think about it, our human brains can't process billions of signals in the way that a computer can. And so I agree with you. I think we have to really use our strategy and what we have historically understood about our business, but be willing to do the A/B testing to understand, is that still the case? How is our consumer evolving? Where do we want to, maybe siphon off some of our budgeting to be more agile, to explore those newer territories? I think that it's going to always be a balance, and there's always going to need to be kind of a real talk about the risk tolerance of our advertisers and exploring that. But I think that really is the future, is being able to lean into what a machine can do at a much faster pace than a human brain, but then still really keep your hands on the wheel to make sure it lands in a place that we all feel good about and is delivering against the KPIs.
Amazing. And now you talked about future there, right? 25, 26, 27, what are the big bets that you're thinking about already for the lead gen space and for the clients you're working with?
I think I am so excited about a world where we can execute on offline conversions all the way to the final sale in a much more efficient way. I think we've made great strides and we have some great solutions today, but it is still difficult for our clients to get there. So making that more seamless, making the data more easily visible across partners, those are some of the things that I look forward to in a few years, and I think AI is going to be a huge accelerator in allowing us to do that, and aggregating the data in a way we can see and organizing it for our processes, and really just being able to get to that final mile that's taking us a long time to get to for many advertisers today. What about you?
I think the biggest for me, and we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, is brand, right, in this space. And I think when you look at brand marketing right now, one, it's not really being used to its potential in lead gen, but also in general, there's this trend of, I heard it kind of put recently as brand marketing is the shield that you're putting up between yourself and the world, right? And it's a very interesting change in what brand used to be. Brand used to be this emotional, bring people in, show them the best side of yourself, and it's become this lane where people are trying to play it a little bit more safe. It's the same means to the same end, right? Like, so how can you lean back in and take advantage of the different solutions that are out there, whether that be AI, whether it be the multitude of touch points and new ways to connect into content and culture to tell a different brand story in lead gen now, right? Like, it's everybody can expect it. The consumer, I talk a lot about like path of least resistance, right? Consumer sees one representation, whether it be brand or performance. They see you as who you are, and leaning into the understanding of who that actually is, and then showing up and doing that every day, right? Being that person, being that brand to that person, and showing up in a brand space, but using it in a different potential, tying it to a different KPI, but holding it accountable, and opening up this new lane that lead gen just hasn't used as much in recent years. There's so much opportunity now to do it. It's just finding those right moments, as we talked about, or tentpoles, right? To lean in and really like lean in, get the lead out.
Yeah. Some people are going to say what you just described is a full funnel strategy, but I think that's a little bit against your philosophy. Tell me more about how you think about the idea of full funnel versus the sort of pushing into brand for a lead gen advertiser.
Well, it's funny. It's not full funnel, but it's this. We've been great at like constantly swinging the pendulum between brand and performance, right? Like turning on one side or turning off the other side, and it seems like that's the only place people feel comfortable living. Or if it's like in a perfectly funnel laid down chart of like we're going to go in this way, and this is kind of like the way that we're going to approach it. It's going to waterfall downwards, and it's sometimes the funnel is just flipped sideways, or it doesn't exist, and it's this whole different journey now. It's more about just how these things work in unison, right? Like how do you lean into brand, create the headroom for then performance? Yep. It's about like. It's almost, somebody described it to me recently, I don't know if everybody remembers like the TI calculators, but it's like a sinc cost curve, right? Like how does it come up and down in the fluctuations between to get to like a spike and sustained strategy using brand and performance? And it kind of took me backwards of, there is a different way to think about this. It doesn't just have to be the way that we've all learned in marketing textbooks and have been taught at the agency side for years. We're allowed to break it a little bit and kind of change and just move the stones around and see what the order ends up resulting in.
Yeah. So you need to have a degree in calculus to do lead gen advertising is basically
what you're saying. Calculator.
Okay. Or a graphing calculator. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll get one of those. Well, Joe, thank you so much for being here today. This has been a really great conversation. I think some of the things that I have really taken away from this is it's not just about lead quality, but we really have to make sure that we have quality in the KPIs that we're aligning on. And then I think your pushes around how lead gen advertisers should be thinking about brand was really great. Performance advertisers, they love the instant gratification of our results, but thinking about longer term horizons and how you really feed the bottom of the funnel with brand can be something we can all really focus on.
Well, Kelly, thank you for having me. First of all, I hope that we're back in YouTube studios again, even now that we know how the elevators and floors and all the different doors to get here work. But as we move into 25, that we continue this conversation around lead gen and then beyond, because for us in the planning world, right, we're almost already into planning 2026. So the more that we can continue this conversation about how we kind of pushing our advertisers forward, and like you said, it's constantly getting them to think about that outcome and the right KPI, and then applying it to whatever discipline, even a creative discipline, in terms of brand and lead gen.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to staying connected.
Thanks, me too.